There are moments in life that don't arrive with warning. They don't come with dramatic music or a sign above someone's head. They arrive quietly in an ordinary kitchen on an ordinary evening, and they change everything. This is one of those stories. And before I begin, please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled, because this one needs to travel far. Let me tell you about a man named Elliot Hargrove. Elliot was the kind of man who didn't demand attention, but always earned it. He lived in a clean, modern home in Scottsdale, Arizona. Not a mansion, not a showpiece, but a home that felt intentional, chosen with care, just like every decision he made. He worked in private wealth advisory, a world where trust wasn't given. It was built slowly through consistency and discretion. People handed him their most sensitive financial lives and slept soundly because of it. He was calm the way deep water is calm. Not empty, just still. For 3 years, Elliot had shared his life, his home, his mornings, his quiet evenings, with a woman named Serena Voss. Serena was magnetic. She worked in luxury retail branding, and she moved through every room like she had been specifically placed there to be admired. She had a laugh that turned heads and a confidence that made people feel like they needed to keep up. In the early days, Elliot loved that about her. Her brightness balanced his stillness. Her energy filled the spaces he left quiet. But slowly, without either of them naming it, something had shifted. Serena didn't just enjoy attention. She needed it the way lungs need air. And when Elliot's steady, grounded love stopped feeling like enough, she started reaching elsewhere for the high that validation gave her. It started subtly. Late replies to his messages. Unexplained evenings. Comments that sounded like comparisons, but were wrapped in just enough softness that he couldn't be sure. A mention here. A name there. The kind of thing that plants a seed of unease and then pretends it was never planted. Elliot noticed. He always noticed. He just chose to give her the benefit of the doubt, the way people do when they love someone and aren't ready to stop. But then came a night in the kitchen. It was a Tuesday. Nothing special about it. Elliot was standing near the counter, and Serena was leaning against the marble island the way she always did when she had something to say and wanted it to land casually. She said it like she was talking about the weather. "I have other men, Elliot." He heard it, every word, and for a long second, he stood completely still, the way you do when your brain receives something it doesn't know where to file. He didn't shout. He didn't ask who. He didn't beg or bargain or crumble. He looked at her, just looked at her, and then he said, very quietly, very simply, "Then they can take care of your bills, too." And he walked out of the kitchen. Serena stood there, arms loosely crossed, a small smirk playing at the corner of her mouth, believing she had just done something powerful, believing she had reminded him of her value, believing that jealousy would come next, and with it, more attention, more effort, more of him chasing her. She went to bed that night thinking she had won something. She had no idea that by the time she closed her eyes, Elliot had already made a decision that she would not fully understand until it was far too late to reverse. Oh, but here's what breaks your heart just a little when you sit with this story long enough. Because Elliot didn't leave in anger. He left in grief. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't let you cry loudly but sits heavy in your chest at 2 in the morning when the house is dark and you're alone with the truth of what your relationship actually was. That night, while Serena slept, Elliot sat in the living room. No lights, just the pale glow of his laptop open on the coffee table. He wasn't working. He was sitting with something he had been avoiding for a long time. Not the question of whether Serena loved him, but the question of how long he had been rearranging himself to fit around someone who treated him like a backup plan. And somewhere between midnight and 2 in the morning, it hit him. He hadn't lost her. He had lost himself. If you're listening to this right now, and something in Elliot's story is touching a nerve you didn't expect, stay with me. Because what happens next is not about revenge. It's not about proving a point. It's about something so much quieter and so much more powerful than either of those things. In part 2, Elliot begins to disappear from Serena's life in ways she can't quite name. and the silence he offers her is louder than any argument could ever be. Don't go anywhere. When we left Elliot, he was sitting alone in a dark living room, not crying, not raging, just finally, clearly seeing something he had been too close to see before. Now let's talk about what a man does when he decides to stop fighting for someone who doesn't respect what they have. The next morning, Elliot woke up, made coffee, and asked Serena if she wanted breakfast. She blinked at him, maybe expecting coldness, maybe expecting the opening round of an argument she had prepared for her. Instead, she got normalcy, warmth even. He handed her a mug. He asked about her day. He listened when she spoke. And that confused her far more than anger ever would have. Because Serena understood conflict. She had spent years navigating it, using it, defusing it, winning it. But she did not understand this. She did not understand a man who had heard what she said and then simply continued, calmly, quietly, without flinching. Over the next several days, Elliot began making small, precise changes. The kind you don't notice until you add them all together. He separated their finances, not with a confrontation, not with a sit-down conversation, just quietly. Subscriptions they had shared were split back to individual billing. Joint expenses were trimmed to only the true essentials. He stopped covering things automatically, the dinner reservations, the top-up for her account when it ran low, the membership he had renewed without her even asking. When Serena suggested a restaurant she had been wanting to try, a beautiful upscale place she had mentioned twice that week, Elliot simply said, "Sure, we can split it." She laughed. She actually laughed, tilting her head like he had said something adorably silly. He didn't laugh back. And in that tiny moment, something flickered behind her eyes. Not quite worried. Not yet. But something. Then came the afternoon that made it real. Serena came down the hallway, holding her phone out, expression slightly pinched with irritation. "My car declined," she said. "At the salon." Elliot looked up slowly. "Use another one," he said, and went back to what he was doing. She stood there, waiting for the sigh, the slight eye roll, the generous gesture that always followed. "The fine, I'll sort it, don't worry." The version of him that smoothed things over before they became things. That version didn't show up. "Elliot." Her voice had an edge now. "What is going on with you?" He set down what he was holding. He looked at her with an expression that wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. Wasn't performing anything at all. "I just figured," he said, very gently, "that the other men would handle that." Oh, the silence that followed. It wasn't explosive. It was surgical. Because those words came back now with weight they hadn't carried the night she said them. She had tossed them out casually, like something light, and here they were, returned to her, solid and real. Serena opened her mouth. I closed it, and for just a moment, she looked young and uncertain and not at all like the woman who had stood in that kitchen and said what she said. But she recovered quickly. She always did. What she didn't understand, yet, was that Elliot wasn't punishing her. He wasn't running a strategy. He wasn't sitting somewhere plotting the perfect countermove. He had simply stopped pretending, stopped cushioning, stopped quietly absorbing things and carrying on as though they hadn't happened. And when a man like Elliot stops softening his edges for you, you feel it, even if you can't name it yet. Pause with me here for just a second, because this is the part of the story where I want to ask you something. When Serena said she had other men, do you think she meant it? Or do you think she was testing him, trying to pull a reaction, trying to remind him that she had options? Because it matters. It matters because the answer tells you something about what she actually wanted. And what Elliot decided, quietly, in that living room at 2 a.m, was that it didn't matter which one it was. Either way, she had chosen to say it, and he had chosen to believe her. Stay with me for part 3, because this is where Serena begins to realize that the ground beneath her has shifted, and the man she thought she could always reach is no longer where she left him. There's a specific kind of panic that doesn't look like panic. It looks like someone casually bringing up a trip they want to take. It looks like someone initiating a conversation about nothing in particular. It looks like someone mentioning the other men again, but this time with less certainty, less swagger, more testing. That was Serena over the following weeks. Elliot, meanwhile, had turned his attention back to himself. Fully, for the first time in longer than he wanted to admit. he was staying later at the office, not avoiding home exactly, but rediscovering the part of himself that existed outside of her orbit. He called a colleague he had drifted from, a man named Patrick who had always been sharp and honest, the kind of friend who tells you the truth without making you feel like a fool for needing to hear it. They had lunch, then dinner, then a regular Thursday evening habit that gave Elliot something he hadn't had in years. Conversation that didn't require him to manage anyone's feelings. He started going back to the gym. 6 in the morning. Nothing dramatic, nothing he announced, just a routine that had quietly disappeared somewhere in the years of adjusting his schedule around Serena's needs. And now, quietly, it was back. He slept better. He laughed more easily. He noticed that he had opinions about things again. And Serena noticed him noticing things that weren't her. One evening, she watched him from the kitchen doorway as he sat reading, comfortable, unhurried, not waiting for her to come in, not tracking whether she was nearby, just existing independently. And something in that image unsettled her in a way she couldn't quite shake. She walked in, sat across from him. "Are you seeing someone?" she asked. Elliot looked up from his book. He looked genuinely, mildly surprised. "No," he said. "Then why are you acting like this?" He tilted his head slightly. "Like what?" Serena's voice dropped, just slightly. "Like I don't matter." Oh, those words. Those 3 words coming from someone who had stood in the kitchen and told him she had other men. There was something in Serena's voice in that moment that wasn't performance. It was real, quiet and real, and just a little bit raw. Elliot set his book down. He didn't move closer. He didn't create distance either. He just looked at her. "Serena," he said softly, "you told me you have other men." She looked down at her hands. "That's not what I meant. But it's what you said." No cruelty in his voice. No sharpness. Just the kind of accuracy that doesn't need volume to land. She didn't have an answer for that. And maybe that was the first time in their entire relationship that Serena Voss sat in front of Elliot Hargrove without an answer. There are moments in relationships that feel like the last real conversation, where something true finally passes between 2 people and neither of them can pretend afterwards that it didn't. This was one of those moments. Serena was quiet for a long time after that, and Elliot let the silence be what it needed to be. Not punishment, just space, just a room that truth needs to breathe. Before he stood up to get water, he said one more thing. "I don't think you're a bad person, Serena. I just think you wanted something I wasn't going to give you. A reaction, a competition, and I'm not going to give you that either." She didn't respond, but her eyes filled. Not all the way, just enough that he noticed and looked away because he wasn't trying to watch her hurt. He wasn't there for that. He just wasn't there anymore. Not fully, and they both knew it. If you've ever sat across from someone you used to love and realized that the version of them you fell for has been slowly replaced by someone you no longer recognize, then you know exactly how Elliot felt right now. And if you're sitting somewhere right now, going through something like this, something quiet and slow and heavy in your chest, just know that you're not imagining it. And you're not alone. Part 4 is coming. And this is where Elliot does something so simple, so clean, so utterly calm, that Serena will finally understand that this was never a fight. It was already over. Some endings don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with raised voices and slammed doors and dramatic declarations. They arrive in the form of a printed document sitting quietly on a kitchen counter on an otherwise unremarkable afternoon. Elliot had been preparing for this moment not with anger, but with clarity. And clarity, when it arrives in full, doesn't need rehearsing. One afternoon, he came home before Serena. He set 2 things on the counter. A cup of tea for her, still warm, and a folded document beside it. When Serena walked in, she set down her bag, noticed the tea, and then noticed the papers. "What's this?" she asked, picking them up. "A lease transfer," Elliot said. He was standing near the window, hands in his pockets, posture loose. Not braced, not performing. "For the apartment." She looked up at him, blinking. "For whose apartment?" "Yours," he said. "I've signed my portion. You can stay if you'd like. Or find something new. That part is up to you." She stared at the papers, then at him, then at the papers again. And here's the thing about Serena Voss that you need to understand. She was a woman who had always had the next move. In every conversation, every negotiation, every moment of tension, she knew what lever to pull. She knew how to pivot, how to soften, how to escalate, how to disarm. But standing there in that kitchen with those papers in her hand, she had no move. Because Elliot wasn't arguing, wasn't asking her to choose, wasn't waiting for her to perform remorse or deliver an explanation. He had simply made a decision, a clean, quiet, final decision, and he was presenting it to her as information. The way you might hand someone their umbrella on the way out the door. "I didn't think you'd take it this far," she said. Her voice was low. Something in it had gone soft in a way he hadn't heard before. Elliot nodded slowly. "I didn't think you would either." There it was. The last honest thing. Not an accusation. Not a goodbye speech. Just the truth, delivered gently, by a man who had once trusted her completely and now simply didn't, and had made peace with that. Serena looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for the hesitation she had always been able to find before. The crack, the opening, the place where she could insert doubt or warmth or provocation and shift things back in her direction. There was nothing there. Not coldness, not hatred, just someone who had fully, completely, and without ceremony moved on. "I loved you," she said, and her voice broke just slightly on the last word. "I know," Elliot said, and he meant it. He believed it in whatever way she understood love. "I loved you too." "Then how can you just?" "Because love doesn't mean accepting everything," he said quietly. "I accepted a lot, Serena, but I can't accept being treated like an option. Not by anyone, not even by you." She didn't cry, not in front of him, but she pressed her lips together in that specific way people do when they're holding something in by sheer force of will. She put the papers on the counter. She picked up her bag, and she left. That evening, Elliot made dinner for one. He sat at the table, ate slowly, and listened to something quiet on the record player. And for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, the apartment felt like his. Not empty. Hi, there's a difference. A significant one. Empty is absence. His was reclaimed space. It was the feeling of a man who had found the edges of himself again after years of letting them blur. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't relieved in any dramatic sense. He was just aligned with his own decisions, with his own life. He washed his plate. He turned off the kitchen light, and he slept through the night without waking once. Before we get to the final part of this story, I want you to sit with something. Elliot never raised his voice. He never made a scene. He never tried to humiliate her or expose her or make her feel small. He just quietly, steadily, completely removed himself from a dynamic that no longer respected him. And sometimes that kind of quiet courage is the hardest kind of all. Part 5 is the last one. And it's not about Serena. It's about what happens to a man when he finally chooses himself. Don't move. A week later, Serena moved out. There was no final argument. No dramatic scene at the door. Just the soft sounds of boxes, of wheels on hardwood, of a life being unthreaded from another life. And then finally, the sound of a door closing. And then silence. But not the heavy, holding your breath kind of silence that had lived in that apartment for months. This was different. This was the silence of a space that had exhaled. The silence of a man sitting in his own living room, in his own home, with his own thoughts, and feeling none of the tension that had become so familiar he had stopped noticing it was there. Elliot didn't call anyone to tell them. He didn't post anything. He didn't mark the occasion in any external way at all. He just sat and breathed. And in that breathing, in that quiet, he felt something move back in a place inside him. Something he hadn't realized had been dislodged until now, when it was settling again. A sense of self, of direction, of knowing that the person sitting in that chair was the same person who made the decisions in that life. Not someone being managed, not someone being kept slightly off balance, not someone waiting to find out what mood the room was in. Just a man, in his home, at peace. In the weeks that followed, he didn't rush into anything. He didn't fill the space with noise or distraction. He worked. He went to the gym. He called his mother, who he had been calling less in recent years, and they talked for 2 hours about nothing and everything, and he laughed more in that conversation than he had in months. He had Patrick over for dinner, just the two of them. They talked about work, about life, about things that mattered. And at some point in the evening, Patrick looked at him and said, You seem different. Different how? Elliot asked. Patrick thought about it. Like yourself, he said. Like the version of you I met 10 years ago. Elliot smiled. Not a big smile. Just a quiet, real one. He thought about Serena sometimes. Not with anger. Not with longing. With something closer to understanding. She was who she was. She had wanted what she wanted. And the person she was not someone who could give him the kind of relationship he needed. That wasn't cruelty, it was just truth. And truth, when you finally let yourself hold it clearly, is one of the gentlest things in the world. He didn't hate her. He hoped, genuinely, that she found whatever she was looking for. He just knew, with complete certainty, that it wasn't him. One Sunday morning, about 2 months after she had left, Elliot sat at the kitchen table with his coffee. Morning light was coming through the window the way it does in late autumn, gold and slow. He had nowhere to be for a few hours. He was reading something he had been meaning to read for a long time. The apartment was quiet, and he thought with sudden, simple clarity, I am okay. Not fixed, not healed in the way that sounds like a journey completed. Just okay. Real, grounded, present okay. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. He had not won anything. He had not proven anything. He had simply, finally, chosen himself. And that, it turns out, was enough. Have you ever stayed somewhere too long because leaving felt too final? Have you ever absorbed something someone said and smiled through it because the alternative was a conversation you weren't ready to have? Have you ever looked up one day and realized that you had become a version of yourself you didn't recognize, slowly, quietly, in the name of keeping the peace? If you have, then you know what Elliot felt in that kitchen on a Tuesday night. And you know what it cost to finally say, without drama, without performance, simply and clearly, not anymore. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Because that's what this is really about. Not the person who leaves. Not the words that were said in the kitchen. Not even the relationship itself. It's about that moment when a person stops negotiating with their own dignity. It's about the 2 a.m. realization that you have been so busy being accommodating that you forgot to be yourself. It's about Elliot sitting at that kitchen table on a Sunday morning with his coffee and his book in the quiet light, and knowing, bone deep, without needing anyone to confirm it, that he had made the right choice. Not because she was the villain of this story, but because he was the main character of his own, and he had finally started acting like it.